Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Cindy Howard, a chiropractic internist and nutritionist, and this is the very first episode of the Positively Altered podcast. Today is October 11th, 2024, and we decided to launch the Positively Altered podcast today. When we were trying to pick a date, I was trying to find a date that had some special meaning. And although by itself it doesn't, it's really interesting because if you take the numbers 101124 and add them together, you get the number 9. And if you add 10 to 11 to 24, you get 45. Add those two numbers together, you get 9, which is my favorite number. And if you follow numerology or you play around with numbers, you'll understand that there's some significance to that. So we decided October 11th, 2024 would be our day. So welcome to the Positively Altered podcast. Now, like anything else that shows up out of the blue, there's a whole lot of prep work that goes in and a whole lot of behind the scenes and a lot of days and sometimes years that lead up to it. So I wanted to share with you today a bit about my story and why the Positively Altered podcast came to be and why it's so very important to me. So let's go back a decade. 2013, wintertime, I have a lymph node that pops out of the side of my neck. And I thought, I must be getting sick. Well, you fast forward a few days and the illness never arrived, and I thought it was really strange. So I decided to work it up, being that I'm a physician. And I ran some blood work and did some tests and ordered some scans. And a very long story made very short is that I wound up having Hodgkin's lymphoma. I self-diagnosed the cancer and decided that I was going to battle that with strength and fortitude and some fun. At the same time, my mother was walking through multiple myeloma and amyloidosis. And just shortly before that, we had lost our dog Gunner, who was not even 3 years old yet, to pancreatic cancer. Let's make it just a little bit more sad. I was also walking through a horrible divorce. Now, before you stop listening because you feel like this is going to be a depressed story, don't. Stay with me because the story is actually really great. I decided to learn a lot and I decided to make it fun. And I had some really amazing people that walked on this journey with me. And after 6 months of walking through Hodgkin's lymphoma, I got on the other side, clearly, because I'm still here to be your host. And there were some great lessons and some great messages that came out of it. Through the entire experience, I decided to keep a journal or a diary, if you will. And as a result of that, I thought, oh my goodness, I have the contents of a book. And I've always wanted to write a book and never did. And that statement of I've always wanted to but never did is something I try not to live by anymore. If there's something I want to do, I go do it. Because you never know if you have the time in the future to get those things done. So I put it together, I rearranged some chapters, I added some, I deleted some, and then I put it away. And I put it away for a very long time. I wasn't quite ready to be vulnerable or transparent or share my story with the world. After all, I was still dealing with a lot of grief and a lot of stress. Single mom, 3 kids to raise, a business to keep running, and that seemed like an enormous amount of work. So lots of years went by and it just kind of sat in the notebook that I wrote it, and then eventually on my computer where I cleaned it up. And one day I decided, you know what? There's so many people that are walking through adversity, not just cancer, but other things that they're really struggling with in their life. And I thought, you know what? As cliche as this sounds, if there is just one person, just one that my story can help feel a little bit better, laugh a little bit louder, or overcome stronger, it will be worth doing. So I pulled out the manuscript, went through it 100 more times, hired a ghostwriter to help me organize it and clean up the grammar, because after all, I'm not necessarily a good writer. I've actually helped both my sons get D's and F's on some of their papers in English class, which I can't really admit to, although I think I just did, because it's hard to call the teacher and complain that your kid got a bad grade when you wrote the paper. So I knew I needed some help on the book. Anyway, months went by, actually over a year, and I finally had something I was super proud of. So through a lot more steps, a lot more money, and getting a lot more people on board, I published my very first book called Positively Altered, Finding Happiness at the Bottom of a Chemo Bag. And what a journey it's been, because you know what? I think it has changed somebody's life, mine. And from that regard, I decided to continue the journey. So now you think to yourself, what's the next step? I run around the country speaking and I love to deliver keynotes and I love to change lives, but how do we do this on a bigger level? And how do we do it with more people so that they can share their journeys and their stories and their uplifting motivation to help others? Because I'm not the only one who has a good story. There's amazing ones out there. And so began the thought process of our podcast. Now, we decided to call it the Positively Altered Podcast because I hope at the end of the day, you will be positively altered. Let me share with you real quick how we came to that because it was pretty amazing. The working title of my book originally was Pregnancy is Worse Than Cancer. I know, how dare she say that? But in my life, pregnancy for me actually was worse than cancer. And I'm not going to give you the spoiler on that. You're going to have to purchase the book in order to learn what my story is. But at the end of the day, I realized that that title could be pretty offensive. And when I was working with an organization, my now friend Johan, who helped me brand Dr. Cindy, he had me fill out an enormous questionnaire in order to help me create the proper brand. And one of the questions, I don't even remember what it was, but stimulated a lot of thought. And when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to accomplish, the words that spilled out of my mouth were, is that I hope that no matter who reads, hears, or encounters anything that I do, I hope that they really will become positively altered in one way or another from that experience. And so the title was born. And because I love the title, we kept it for the podcast. This podcast is raw and unfiltered. We have guests from friends of mine to people I have never met, from local dentists to famous people who you will recognize the name to. But the whole goal is to share ideas, thoughts, stories with absolutely no filter. Be who you want to be, say what you want to say with absolutely zero judgment. Some of you out there will love it, some of you won't. Some guests you'll want to hear more from, and some you may choose to turn off. And it's all okay. That's the beauty of what we're all walking through together. The goal is to figure out, how do we become the better portion of ourself that we love and take away the portion of ourself that's getting in the way? How do we find the joy and the happiness and the gifts in all the crap that is absolutely going to get thrown at us? Because it does. There's no way to walk through this life without some adversity. But we're going to figure out how we react to it. And that's the key. So will you join me, please? Take a listen to some of the fun guests that we are going to have. This is a weekly podcast, so we're going to be back regularly. Laugh with us, cry with us. And if you even think you'll make a good guest, reach out to us. We would love to have you. Raw, unfiltered, your truth, my thoughts on the Positively Altered podcast. If you'd love to be a guest on the Positively Altered podcast, please reach out to hello@drcindyspeaks.com. And my amazing executive assistant, Julie, will touch base with you in order to see if you would make a great guest on the Positively Altered podcast. I also just want to give a quick shout out to all the behind the scenes, because again, you're listening to me, but there are lots of people who make this possible. I want to thank Julie, my personal assistant, Denise, who writes a lot of the copy, Haley, who produces this, and Brad, who put this all together and is the master producer. Without the four of them, this wouldn't be possible. Also, a quick shout out to Megan, who's doing all of the social media to get this out to all of you. So tune in every week. Dr. Cindy, your host of the Positively Altered podcast.